James Webb, former senator from Virginia, has been a combat Marine, a counsel in Congress, an Assistant Secretary of Defense, and Secretary of the Navy, an Emmy Award-winning journalist, a filmmaker, and with the publication of I Heard My Country Calling, the author of 10 books. While in the Senate, he served on the Foreign Relations, Armed Services, Veterans Affairs, and Joint Economic Committees. He has also long been an advocate of fixing America's broken criminal justice system, and the Atlantic magazine named him one of the world's brave thinkers for tackling prison reform and possessing two things vanishingly rare in Congress: a conscience and a spine. Webb graduated from the Naval Academy in 1968, receiving a special commendation for his leadership contributions, first in his class at the Marine Corps Officers Basic School. He served as a Rifle Platoon Company Commander in Vietnam and was awarded the Navy Cross, the Silver Star Medal, 2 Bronze Star Medals, and 2 Purple Hearts. He graduated from the Georgetown University Law Center in 1975. From 77 to 81, he served as counsel to the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. In 1984, he was appointed Assistant Secretary to Defense for Reserve Affairs, and in 1987, he became Secretary of the Navy. In addition to his public service, he's enjoyed a varied career as a writer. As a journalist, he received an Emmy Award for his PBS coverage of the U.S. Marines in Beirut in 1983, and in 2004 was embedded with the U.S. military in Afghanistan. A screenwriter and producer, he wrote the original story for the film Rules of Engagement. He's written 10 books of fiction and nonfiction, including Born Fighting, A History of the Scots-Irish Culture in America, and Fields of Fire, widely recognized as the classic novel of the Vietnam War. In Tuesday's Wall Street Journal, Robert Scales writes, "Too many memoirs are exercises of self-regard, if not self-aggrandizement. James Webb's I Heard My Country Calling avoids this error by giving the achievements of his later life only in the briefest framing reference. Mr. Webb is intent, rather, on telling the story of his formative years as an Air Force brat, an Annapolis midshipman, and a Marine in Vietnam. The result is more than personal reminiscence. Mr. Webb's narrative captures the experience of a generation of children raised during the Cold War and embedded in the new culture of America's expanded armed forces. The sweep of this wonderful book makes it the alpha and omega of the Cold War's truest children. It begins with pride and patriotism that comes from living with warrior fathers and ends with illusion dispelled by a bloody little war in Vietnam. It's a brilliant personal recollection that also brings alive a forgotten period of American history." Ladies and gentlemen, Senator James Webb.
Thank you very much, David. And I would like to start by saying that David Ferriero is not only the archivist of our country, holding here the repository of so many of our national treasures, but he also served our country in Vietnam as a corpsman attached to the United States Marines. So I'm grateful for your service, Dave. The National Archives have a special place for me. I think as with so many others. Actually, it was almost exactly 3 years ago today that we had a screening here for a 2-hour documentary that we were able to do on one of my books, Born Fighting, which was a cultural history of the Scotch-Irish people beginning in Scotland and into Northern Ireland and then the settlements down the Appalachian Mountains. It was a great evening that night. There was a lot of very fine Scotch whiskey because the Scottish TV was one of the producers of the show. I also spent a lot of time in the National Archives during my student days at Georgetown Law, and actually after that when I was a pretty starving writer trying to get my book Fields of Fire published. It was rejected originally by a dozen publishers, and we just kept going on it. But my grandmother, and I'm going to talk a little bit about her, I write about her quite a bit in this book, had raised us in the the oral tradition, the old Southern oral tradition. Every night before we went to bed, she'd tell a story about one of our ancestors and one of the things that happened over this great journey down the wagon roads and out into western Tennessee and eastern Arkansas, where she ended up. And I had asked her when I was about 11 years old if she would just put all that down in writing. And she had written just page after page of the family chronicles with dates, like my great-great-grandfather enlisted in Arkansas infantry on July some date, 1861 in Woodruff County, Arkansas, et cetera. And so I spent a lot of time over here using her letter as a source document, doing a good bit of our family history. And I was talking to David. I think it's a lot easier to do that today than it was back then, when you had to go through all the microfiche rolls and check out one county history versus another. I'm going to speak for a while about my book and why I decided to write this particular book, and then I'm going to I'll be happy to open up the forum for any questions that you might have. Since I left the Marine Corps, I've spent almost exactly half of my life in public service and half of it out of public service. When I'm not in public service, my profession has been as a writer, a novelist and a journalist and otherwise. And those are not exactly the most compatible careers in the American system, the literary system versus the political system. Our style of democracy, I think, rather naturally creates a tension between the literary world, particularly the journalistic world, and the governing world. And so it's been an accidental and somewhat unusual journey for me over the years to go from one of the environments into the other. And as I said, it was accidental. When I left the Marine Corps and started studying at Georgetown Law, I discovered this real passion for writing. My last year in the Marine Corps, I was on a medical hold in the Secretary of the Navy's office, and I started writing as a part of my job for the first time, and loved it. Wrote 3 full-length articles for military journals when I was in the Pentagon, and then hitting the law school, I just found myself more fascinated with writing, the beauty of writing, capturing your own thoughts, the independence of it, than I did with a lot of the legal studies that I was being required to learn. At the same time, I'd been raised from a very young age to be a leader, and that's another theme that I try to capture in this book, is the impact that my father had on all of us, having gone into the military during World War II with no college, the first in our family actually to finish high school, and then getting a commission in World War II, becoming a pilot, flew B-29s, B-17s, and at the end of the war being riffed, cut like so many of the citizen soldiers of the war when our country demobilized. And then in 1947, when we came to realize that we were going to have a larger military because of the Cold War and other things that were going on, a mantle that our country did not, wasn't very excited about undertaking at the time. We had, after every war, demobilized until the end of World War II, and we had demobilized just in the aftermath of World War II, but that gave my father the chance by 1947 to go back in the military and fly again. And from that point forward, for the next 3.5 years, he was almost continually deployed. He was either overseas or in bases that did not have family housing at that time. And watching what he went through and watching the example he set every night at the dinner table when he was home really instilled in all of us a very vigorous feeling of love of country, the understanding of sacrifice for your country, and that the greatest honor you can have is to be able in some way or another to serve your country. So on the one hand, I'd fallen in love with writing, and on the other, I'd always been raised to lead, and so I would write for a while and then miss